Level 1, $0, you're 24. You open the account because HR hands you a packet on day one and says everyone does it. You don't read it. You check a box that says 3%. You don't know what 3% means in dollars. You don't know what a match is. You just check the box because not checking it feels like doing something wrong. The first paycheck comes and $61 is missing from it, gone somewhere you can't quite picture. You don't think about it again for 11 months. You log in once out of boredom on a slow Tuesday at work. The balance says $2,140. You stare at it the way you'd stare at a stranger's mail that accidentally ended up in your box. It doesn't feel like yours yet. It doesn't feel like anything. Retirement is a word that belongs to your parents, to people with gray hair and folding chairs on a porch. Not to you, not at 24, not with $2,140 sitting in an account you forgot existed for most of a year. The first rule, at $0, retirement isn't a decision you make. It's a box you check without reading, and the box does more than you will for the next 5 years combined. Level 2, $15,000. You're 28 now. You changed jobs twice and rolled the old accounts into the new one, mostly by accident, mostly because a form told you to and you didn't want to deal with 2 logins. You bumped your contribution to 6% at some point without remembering exactly when, chasing the employer match because a coworker mentioned leaving free money on the table like it was a personal failing. You still don't check the account often. When you do, the number moves in ways that don't make sense to you, up $801 month, down $400 the next, and you've stopped trying to understand why. You tell yourself you'll learn about investing eventually, the way you tell yourself you'll learn a language or start running. The market drops 14% in a bad quarter and you feel your stomach tight checking the balance, not because $15,000 changes your life if it disappears, but because it's the first number you've ever watched shrink in real time and not been able to do anything about. You don't sell, not from discipline, from not knowing what selling would even mean mechanically. The ignorance protects you this time, it won't always. The second rule, at $15,000 you're not investing yet. You're just not stopping the thing that started without you. Level 3, $60,000. You're 33, something shifted not dramatically but you started paying attention around 30 after a friend mentioned compound interest at a dinner and you went home and actually did the math instead of nodding along. You increased your contribution to 10%. You picked a target date fund because a blog told you to and it seemed less terrifying than picking your own. You check the account monthly now, sometimes weekly, which your younger self would find strange, this new relationship with a number that used to mean nothing. You run a projection calculator one night, plug in your current numbers, your current rate, retirement at 65. The number at the end looks enormous and also insufficient at the same time, both things simultaneously, and you don't fully understand how a number can be both. You realize you have no idea what enough actually means. Nobody ever gave you that number. Financial advisors talk in percentages. Your parents talk in fear. Nobody just tells you the target. You close the calculator without an answer. The third rule, $60,000, is where you stop ignoring the account and start resenting how little anyone explains about what you're actually building toward. Level 4, $150,000. You're 38. The account crossed 6 figures 18 months ago and you remember the exact week because you took a screenshot, the same instinct as everyone before you at this milestone, saving proof of a moment nobody else will ever ask to see. You've read 3 books on investing now, you know what an expense ratio is. You moved out of the target date fund into a simpler 3-fund portfolio because you understood finally that the fees you weren't paying attention to for a decade were quietly eating returns the whole time. You calculate what that decade of unnecessary fees cost you. The number makes you slightly sick. You don't tell anyone this number either, not the balance, not the mistake. Both feel too private, one because it might seem like bragging, one because it feels like evidence of something you should have caught sooner. A market crash hits when you're 39. The account drops to $118,000 over 6 weeks. Financial news says things like historic volatility and unprecedented. You don't sell. This time it's not ignorance. It's the thing you read about in all 3 books, the thing that sounded like a platitude until your own hands were the ones hovering. You hold. The fourth rule, $150,000, is where the discipline stops being accidental and starts being a decision you have to actively make over and over, especially when it's hardest. Level 5, $400,000. You're 44. The recovery happened the way the book said it would, quietly without asking your permission, over about 14 months. You're contributing the max now or close to it, plus a small taxable account on the side because someone at work mentioned backdoor Roth in a hallway conversation and you spent a weekend figuring out what that meant. You run the retirement calculator again, the same one from 6 years ago. The number at the end looks different now, not enormous and insufficient at the same time, just plausible. You feel something you don't quite have a word for, not relief exactly, more like the first sight of a shoreline from a boat that's been out for longer than you'd like to admit. Your kid asks what you do with the money that disappears from your paycheck. You try to explain compound growth to an 8-year-old using a jar of coins and a made-up interest rate, and you watch the concept land somewhere behind their eyes, half understanding, half boredom. You realize you're teaching the thing nobody taught you. That feels like its own kind of return, one that doesn't show up on any statement. The fifth rule, $400,000, is where the math stops being abstract and starts feeling like a shoreline instead of an ocean. Level 6, $800,000. You're 49. You hired a fee-only financial planner 2 years ago, not because you needed hand-holding on the basics anymore, but because the questions changed shape. Roth conversion ladders, asset location across account types, whether to prioritize the taxable account or the tax-deferred one in early retirement withdrawal sequencing. Words that didn't exist in your vocabulary at $60,000 are now the entire conversation. The planner charges $3,200 a year. You almost didn't hire her, the fee felt steep for advice you assumed you could Google. In her first year, she restructures your withdrawal strategy in a way that saves an estimated $22,000 in lifetime taxes, a single conversation worth nearly 7 times her fee. You stop thinking of financial advice as an expense and start thinking of it as leverage. Your parents ask when you're going to retire, half joking, half genuinely curious because the number sounds big to them, bigger than anything either of them ever held. You don't correct their sense of it. You just say not yet and let the conversation move somewhere else, because explaining the actual math, the 4% rule, the sequence of returns risk, the gap between big number and safe number, would take longer than the moment allows. The sixth rule, $800,000, is where you stop managing the money yourself and start managing the decision of who else gets to touch it. Level 7, $1,400,000. You're 54. The account crossed 7 figures 3 years ago, and unlike the 6-figure milestone, you didn't screenshot it. It didn't feel like a moment, it felt like a Tuesday. This is the part nobody tells you about crossing a million, that the crossing itself is quieter than every milestone before it, because by the time you get there you've stopped watching for it the way you used to. You run the retirement calculator a final time, or what feels like a final time, plugging in a target retirement date of 62 instead of 65, moving it earlier because the math finally allows it. The number holds. You show your spouse the spreadsheet, not to celebrate, just to confirm you're both looking at the same reality. They ask the question you've been avoiding asking yourself directly: what do you actually want to do with the time? You don't have a clean answer. You spent 30 years building toward a number, and somewhere in that process, the number became the goal instead of a means to something you'd actually chosen. This is its own kind of quiet reckoning, the discovery that the hardest planning left undone isn't financial. The seventh rule, $1,400,000, doesn't hand you a plan for your time. It just removes the excuse you've been using not to build one. Level 8, $2 million. You're 61. You retire 14 months ahead of the date on that old spreadsheet, not because the number told you to, but because a health scare that turned out to be nothing reminded you that the number was never actually the point. The first Tuesday of retirement, you wake up without an alarm and lie there for a moment, waiting for the specific anxiety that used to accompany a work week, and it doesn't come. It takes another 2 weeks before that absence stops feeling strange. You withdraw your first distribution, a modest, calculated percentage designed to outlast you by decades, and the process is almost anticlimactic. A transfer that looks identical to every other transfer you've ever made, except this one isn't going toward the goal anymore, it's coming from it. You think about the version of yourself at 24, checking a box on a form he didn't read, $61 disappearing from a paycheck into an account that felt like nothing. That version of you built this entirely by accident at first and then slowly on purpose. He couldn't have pictured this Tuesday. He wasn't trying to. He was just trying to stop feeling guilty about an unchecked box. Somewhere right now, someone is 24 holding a benefits packet they haven't read, about to check a box without understanding what 3% means in dollars. They don't know yet that this is the whole story. Not the market, not the advisor, not the number at the end. Just the box checked or not, and 37 years standing quietly on the other side of that decision, waiting to find out which way it goes. The eighth rule, the account was never really about the number. It was about becoming, one decade at a time, the kind of person who didn't need to think about the number anymore.